So a common question I get is, how does your listening skills affect other forms of communication? So, are you interested in improving your communication skills? Do you want to become more persuasive? Maybe win some more friends? Maybe influence more people to see the world your way? Well, then stay tuned, because I'm going to talk to you about the most important thing you can do to advance all of these interests. So let's start with a reminder. Communication is an exchange of thoughts, messages, or ideas with another person, usually with some purpose of maybe educating, informing, or influencing. And to the degree that is true, listening is the most important thing we can do, because when we listen, it influences how we frame our message. Because if we want to be effective in our communication, we want to make sure that we frame our message in a way that matches the worldview of the person with whom we're trying to communicate. First, listening impacts how we frame our communication. So let me tell a story of working with a client who was trying to get their supervisor, who was actually the superintendent of a school district, to support more resources in certain science programs. It was very clear from my client that a compelling story could be made about why additional resources for sciences would improve the quality of education and outcomes on state-mandated testing. And so the client I was working for was constantly confused as to why the superintendent was just really unimpressed with the evidence. And then in further conversation, I suggested that this client of mine spend some time listening and observing to how the school superintendent made their decisions. And after a few weeks, the client comes back to me and says, in the conversations, what I always realize is that this superintendent really only cares about winning a competition with another regional school district that was also considered a high-performing district. And so hearing that, right, what I said was, okay, you keep on framing your arguments around what would be better for the students, what would be better for the state test scores. And listen, I'm compelled by that. But now that you've done a really good job listening and observing the person that you're trying to persuade, you need to craft all of your stories around how it's going to win the competition with this competing school district, because that is the thing your boss cares about. So when we listen well, we understand how do we frame the story, how do we tell the story in a way that's compelling to the person we're trying to influence. Second, right, really good listening helps us understand not just how to frame the communication, but what mode the communication should be in. So to give you another example, some years ago when I was teaching at Harvard Law School, it was clear that the HLS Dean of Students was constantly frustrated because it would send long emails to students over and over again on different things that they needed to do in order to register for their classes and to be eligible for graduation. And inevitably, over and over again, many students would fail to follow through. Now, was it the case that these students were unable to follow through on commitments or couldn't follow instructions? No, it wasn't. What it really was a problem on the HLS, on the Harvard Law School Dean of Students office, where because they weren't listening really well to the students, they didn't understand that most students we're just not reading emails, right? At this point, communication was done via text or social media. And so if we don't listen well, we don't really know what mode of communication we should be using. Third, when we listen well, right, we also can understand not just how to frame, not just the communication mode, but also how do we be sensitive around timing. So let me tell you a story involving how a failure to really listen well ended up backfiring on a student who had otherwise done really high quality work. So throughout the semester, the administrative assistant for my program had repeatedly said to students, if there are steps that you would like me to take to follow through on your project, please do so in a timely way so that I can follow up and handle it well. So I had this otherwise wonderful student who throughout the semester had been doing really good work, but literally 1 hour before the project was due on December 22nd, before the holidays, sends to the administrative assistant 15 emails about his final project with steps that she needs to do. Now, from this student's perspective, he had clearly met the deadline, which was December 22nd. But in fact, by not listening, what happened is the administrative assistant became extremely angry. Suddenly, she had 15 different tasks that she needed to do within an hour just for this one student. Really good listening along the way would have avoided this catastrophe, and in the end, this student's reputation with the administrative assistant suffered enormously. Finally, really good listening helps us understand the how of giving and receiving feedback. So what do I mean by that? Well, sometimes if you're giving feedback to someone, what they really want to do is the specific things that they need to do better. Other people, for example, want to hear some things they did well and some things they could do differently. When we listen well, right, what we first do is before we're giving feedback, before we're receiving that feedback, we actually ask what would be most helpful, what would make a difference, so that we can tailor that feedback in a way that will have the maximum impact. So, when it comes to increasing our ability to influence others, increase our ability to communicate with others, first, we want to think about how do we frame that communication. Secondly, we want to think about what mode the communication should be in. Should it be text or in person or over the phone or email? Third, we want to think about the timing. When can we do it in a way that lands most effectively? And fourth, we want to think about the style or content. How effective we'll be will depend on our ability to really listen well and understand the cues of what matters to the person on the other side. So, if you want to continue your journey in improving your communication skills, watch this next video, which are what are good communication skills in a relationship. And before you go, I'd be grateful if you could subscribe to this channel, like, and ring the bell. Okay, you want to improve your communication skills in a relationship? Keep watching.